and welcome to the Diablo podcast, brought to you by PureDiablo.com, your home for community, an ever-expanding wiki. And this podcast, I am your host, Xanth, and I am joined today by Vang
Yo,
and Angst.
Hello.
So before we get going, obviously, Angst, you're new here. What's your background? What brings you in? Love of Diablo, all that jazz. Your life story, essentially.
Oh boy, that's a big one. No, a few people may or may not remember my name. I used to work for Diablo fans as a news manager, guide writer back in the early Reaper of Souls days. That's like 2014 to 17-ish, I think. Did their patch data mining stuff and did some BlizzCon coverage and all that jazz. Um, After that, I don't know, unless you are one of my like 12 Twitter followers, you wouldn't have heard of me at all. But I've still been playing, mostly D3, some D2R. Um, Touched on Immortal a little bit, and now I'm working a bit on the background side of Pure Diablo as well, which is how I got here.
Your, consistent commentary about wanting to be here and argue about trades. So
Yeah,
we're happy to
bullying my
have you.
way onto this podcast, exactly.
I don't think you need to bully. We're happy to take really anybody. I think one of the things uh, in getting this podcast back together is I like talking about Diablo. I like talking to new people about Diablo. I like talking to the same people about Diablo. I just like talking about Diablo, and I think if I like to do it and I like to hear it, somebody else out there wants to as well. So as long as people are willing to talk, I'm willing to click record. Um, and be a part of that conversation. So, obviously, welcome back. Welcome to the team. And Rush, as you're editing, if you wanted to get us t-shirts, I can get you my address. Like at the bare minimum, you're gonna do. I know you do all the heavy lifting, you do the editing, you're gonna make it look pretty. But wouldn't we look better in t-shirts? You can see all of us now. If we were all wearing a t-shirt, like that's the bare minimum. I will do so many things for a free t-shirt. Um, So maybe we make that happen. Uh, we're running too long here. He's cutting this part. It's gone. No t-shirt talk. Back to work. Okay, so speaking of which, we're coming back to work now. Um, some stuff is happening. At least that was what we're being told. The general assumption is that the Diablo 4 endgame beta has started. I only know that because people who are incapable of reading an email are then quickly posting that they got emails. Um, an NDA exists for a reason. We're not going to talk about leaks. We don't talk about leaks, but we do know that it's happening, which is exciting because it means one that timetables seem to be lining up. Um, so are you guys confident that we're going to be catching Diablo 4 maybe in June as the general assumption with this happening now?
I'm still hoping for June, yeah. Or, well, I don't know. May is probably a stretch, not too much happening in May, I suppose. But yeah, with the original, well, release window announcement, I suppose that still does line up, I hope. But I guess we might know more by the end of this year. So
I am going to play optimistic. I have been calling it around an April release, and I really think that's when they're going to get it out. Um, like it's been going around in Reddit and stuff. That we know that this beta already started. At least some people got in. We know it ends around the 18th of November is when the last invite. So I'm figuring about 3 weeks. Put it like the first week of December before that ends. They take a break. Right around Christmas time, so probably 3 weeks off. They hammer it out. So probably beginning of February, we have the open beta. They do that for 4 or 5 weeks, and then we're ready to go. Um, I the biggest reason why I'm saying that is with Diablo 3, what they proved was you can release a shitty product, um, and then revamp it later, and people will still buy it. Diablo Immortal already proved that. Like they just know that people are so clamoring for Diablo game the initial sales is where it's going to hit. And with it being almost like a service oriented thing to where, we're going to do battle passes that are paid for, they will get more people to sign up over time when they fix it, release new content. So I think the initial reaction, as long as it's good enough to like get you to buy it, I think they'll be okay in the long run. If that's what they're really going for.
But on the other hand, I'd like to argue that they do kind of have a reputation to restore, let's put it this way, because the last few releases have been mixed reception, let's put it that way. It's something they need to push something out the door when it's actually done at this point, I think.
So in 5 years or 6 years,
Yeah.
when they decide they're releasing Diablo 5,
Fair enough,
regardless
fair
of what Diablo 4 is, I'm still going to buy it. I mean, in 20 years, when I'm 60-ish years old, it's Diablo
Oh,
6 now. Boom.
Ben, you got to stop. You got to stop there because, man, now they know. Now they know. And yeah, of course, it's the Diablo podcast. It would be really weird if we didn't. We're like, I need to wait and see. No, like we're going to, but let's not get a lot of people on that bandwagon. I think, and so I do think you're right. I do think like a reputation check is kind of in order, like to it Diablo 3 took a while, right? And it took a while to come around. And it has its detractors and then we have D2R and like there are two camps. And I think like and this is all speculation, but I think there is a goal of trying to get a game that appeals to both, right? Of trying to get like a unified Diablo. And obviously there's always going to be detractors in either camp, but um like to kind of get everybody on the same path again. I think that would be a good thing. Um, so yeah, that involves getting it right and kind of sticking the landing. But one of those things, when we talk about sticking a landing, is going to be trade. Um, we don't know much about trade. There has been some limited whispers here and there. We have gotten some information about what can and can't be traded, but we don't necessarily know what that means or how that looks. So until we find out, I thought we could take a little trip down memory lane, look at the different systems, and see what you guys thought about either, or I should say, what you thought about many of them, and maybe we can figure out what Diablo 4 might do best. Before we go into it, though, do you guys have a best or worst trade? I put this out there a little while ago on Twitter just to see what other people had to say. Is there a trade out there that stands out in your mind of like, man, I made this work, or wow, I really got screwed?
You mean like personally, did I do a trade? You're talking about like the like game system.
Personally, like, obviously trade interacting with other players, ideally, but I mean, we can talk about that as we get going. Is there a trade that really stands out in your brain?
I play mainly single player, so no. Sorry,
No?
I
You got nothing. Of course. I
I
mean, if
haven't
there's
traded in
nobody,
years.
if there's nobody around to trade, can you have a trade story?
I mean, we can trade with the forum, but the forum's pretty legitimate on that. The way we handle it. So I don't think there's anything that sticks out in my mind that like, hey, this was the best trade I ever did, even
Right.
from like
Inks, you
20 years
got
ago.
anything?
Not too much either. In D2, I actually did play mostly single player as well. Dipped into online a fair bit later down the line, but that was at a point where um, I basically didn't have the time to grind enough anymore to actually get to anywhere worthwhile in terms of trading even. Um, and then D3, of course, there's always times on the auction house where you put up an item and it sells in 2 seconds, and you're like, God damn it, I could have made that 3 times more expensive. Um,
Right.
but yeah, on a personal level, honestly, no, not really.
I did see a few people had mentioned the classic bait and switch, which was something that we saw pretty frequently in Diablo 2, where you're shown the item that you want, like, oh yeah, and then quickly it's swapped to a different item. I would be lying if I said that didn't happen to me at one point. I wish I could remember the item. I was never trading like for super high-end stuff. But I remember being severely disappointed when I looked again. I was like, wait a second. So hopefully, and there are systems now in place, right? There are systems now in place that should hopefully prevent that, but it's always player and user error where you kind of rush through things. Um, all right, so
So the classic Shaco for what is it, a cap with an emerald in it, just
right,
so that it still looks green.
right. And you're like, oh well, it. I looked at it just a second ago. It was
Yeah.
fine. Um, And now, like there are sometimes where you actually have to, I think Path of Exile does it where you have to hover over the item to make sure. But again, even there, I'm like, okay, I want to get this trade done, swing over real quick, not really paying attention. So easily could get screwed right there. So the first trading system, let's go back in the day. And this is an age test, essentially, right? We go to Diablo 1. So Diablo 1 trading not super existent, but if anybody remembers, you could download a program and essentially trade yourself every single item you want. Now, I don't know what consensus we're going to come to today, but I think it's safe to assume that's not the trading system we'd like to see in Diablo 4. Am I
I
wrong?
don't. I kind of like Boba Fett, you know.
But probably not though. We don't need to be doing that. It was fun at the time, but I was also in 5th grade. So,
Yeah, I was seventh,
yeah.
and then you get like a Dream Flange circlet or the cap, and you're like, "Whoa, this is amazing!" And then you realize that like it doesn't actually exist in the game
Yeah,
as that
yeah.
item. Yeah, that was my first trades that I ever did was on that game, and people just toss you all these items. You're like, "Oh, these are amazing," and then you realize they don't actually exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good times, but not a robust system, not something we would hope to see. And we've gotten a little more complicated. So let's look at Diablo 2, right? I feel like when it comes to trading, Diablo 2 is probably what more people are, I'm not saying leaning towards, but at least basing things off of, right? We'll get to Diablo 3 and both iterations of Diablo 3 later on in the show, but let's start with Diablo 2. So Diablo 2's trade system, right? Essentially, it is pretty much open trade. You can basically trade for anything, right? And as a result, if you are then able to trade with everybody, that your drop pool is a little bit more limited because everybody else is capable of getting it and capable of giving it to you, so your chances of getting it are lessened. Um, and then we'll get into the Wild West of it later, but the general gist, right? Everything is open, everything's on board. So, what are our thoughts on Diablo 2 system? Yay? Nay?
I think it's really good for newer players. Knowing when D2R launched, one of the things I noticed was there's a lot of people who've never played Diablo before. Some played Diablo 3 a little bit, and they hit Diablo 2, and it's like this old school game that's really hard. Like people don't know how to play, and so you have somebody that's been playing it for years. They're like, "Hey, let's get you some gear." They toss them some gear. They give them a rush through, and they just like start doing like runs and stuff. Whether they're cow runs or ball runs, whatever. And they're playing the game. They're not really learning how to play the game. They're just kind of like running around. So like from that perspective, if you just want to get somebody up to speed and like have them like kind of like see how the game goes and what it's worth, that's a benefit to that kind of system. And it's nice if you're playing a new season, you walk in, a couple weeks in, you just walk in a free trade game and you get a couple pieces of gear to get you started. If you are just playing your own character, playing with a small group of friends, there's also a benefit to that.
Right, but on the other hand, you could argue that especially for newer players, for them it may be important to actually go through the journey of building your own character with the stuff you find yourself, or at least with the stuff you manage to trade for yourself, to get the authentic Diablo experience, whatever that may be. So yeah, just like dumping a bunch of items on an actual new player, I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of. Like if it's like your 17th character and you just want to get it over with, then sure, right? Like whatever. I don't care. But I feel like the progression in the game has been designed that way for a reason, and just yeah, again, dumping a whole bunch of items on somebody just subverts that entirely. But yeah, in terms of the completely open trade system in general, I don't know. I've never been a huge fan, although Diablo 2 does come from a different time, right? I mean, we've seen how open trade would work in Diablo 3 in a more modern game. We'll get to that, I know. But Diablo 2 basically had no real support to facilitate trades, right? We've talked about it on the pre-show a bit. Like, you maybe have amazing items, you maybe even want one specific thing, and then how do you make that happen? How do you find someone to trade that good thing you have for that other good thing you want? And in terms of D2, there just wasn't any built-in support at all.
Yeah, I think that I think maybe even 5 years ago, this would be the camp and this would be the hill I was ready to die on. And then I played the most recent ladder season, and I loved it. I want to stress, I absolutely loved the journey, but I reached a point where there was an item I wanted, but I couldn't get. And yes, you are correct. There would be a time like I could farm and I could farm and I could farm. But like that was the barrier. Like that was the point where I'm just like I don't want to put in this amount of time right now to get this minor improvement. But like I also need it to kind of get where I want to be. And knowing like what was there kind of sucked. Um, Whereas, we can look at when we get to the other systems, that's not as much of an issue. But, you know, it, anyways, for me, my determination on this has shifted a lot. Um, doesn't mean I still don't love D2R for what it is, but like that got me. That got me a little bit. And then the character died anyway. Um, so which
Classic.
they all do. I didn't get that item, and thankfully I didn't put in that time. But maybe I died because I didn't put in that time. And see, there's the struggle, right? There's what I have to deal with um, in my brain. But I'm happy that I died, so I didn't have to have that eternal debate with myself. Now, the other side of it too, and we talked about this pre-show, is because and angst. I like what you brought up there about not having a system set in place to find those things. There are other more nefarious happenings in Diablo 2. Sites like D2JSP or the various botting and other pay to win kind of sites that fill in that gap, right? Because there isn't a system, people have created a system. And when you start trying to, get those pieces of gear and you're pushed to an outside source or you're pushed to a trading site that isn't exactly what you want to be doing, that can lead to, I think, more frustration too. And that was kind of the impetus with Diablo 3 and its auction house. Um, so that, like I said, it doesn't feel good, but I also still do really like that open trade concept. I do really like that at any point somebody can come into my game and drop a lot of items or like try to help um, with various pieces of garbage gear that they no longer want. Um, so, I think like moving forward, obviously with Diablo 4, how do you preserve that without entering the Wild West? Any other thoughts on Diablo 2's trading system? Long-lasting gripes.
The only thing I would say is I play a lot of tournaments. The one I do right now is a random one, so you only get a couple weapons you get to use. So I'm very accustomed to playing like a melee character who's underpowered, and that's my preferred playstyle. But my one buddy who plays single player too, he was telling me how he was doing a barbarian and he can't find a weapon that deals enough damage to like actually progress like past like mid nightmare because he doesn't know all the grinding spots, and that's where the trade really comes into play. Is to where like if you don't know as much about the game and you don't know exactly how to like mimic the devices, use a cube. Like the cube is not like very easy to use for most people. Like they can go on websites and they just don't get it sometimes on like all the little goofy like the savage partisan that you can make at like level 23 or so and get that start racking things. So I think that's where the trade really helps out with Diablo 2 is that for the sorceresses and hammerdens that just rely on plus skills, they can just find whatever the heck they need and get it. But for the melee characters, whether they're bow or a barbarian, they need that extra little oomph that they can get from trading if they don't know the ins and out, where to farm, what can drop at every place. Like, Nightmare Mephisto is great for certain things, but there was also a cap to that. And, I think and if you don't know the upgrade recipe, like, Bone Snap's an amazing weapon to use, but if you don't know that you can upgrade it to get first 50% crushing blow, it's kind of like one of those hit or miss things on most people. They don't know all the ins and outs. So that's where trading comes into play, I think. Let's not talk about rewards.
Yeah, I mean it's tough. It is. I like that analogy of trade being a stopgap for knowledge, right? Um, that it can take the place or it can push you into a next act or whatever it might be and allow you to progress and maybe come back, right? And come back and figure out those kind of things because you've accomplished whatever goal it was. And now it's like, oh, I want to get that better.
Right. And sorry to
Oh
interrupt.
no, please.
And at the same time, another thing trade does, it also rewards game knowledge. Like knowing where to farm certain things, knowing what is valuable to other players can give you definitely an edge, right? Because then you can, well, game the system is a bit much, but you can make use of that game knowledge in a fairly tangible way. But another point I wanted to get into was the community aspect that is often brought up in terms of trade. Because of course, if you have a clan or a guild or whatever it may be called, and you're trading within that clan, within that guild, that of course fosters a sense of community, or even if it's just a group of friends, or maybe you meet someone because you traded with them. That is definitely one of the upsides of open trade on a like non-supported framework. Let's put it this way, because if you again, I know we'll get to it, but if you look at the Diablo 3 auction house, I don't know who the hell I just bought that item from. Like I'll never interact with that person ever in any meaningful way. But then, of course, maybe on the flip side of that, look at the Diablo 2 chat right now and tell me if that fosters community, what is happening there right now.
Yeah, Inks, I think it's like a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of
Yeah,
thing. Because if you have, um, you know, a myriad of trade games, jumping in, jumping out, finding that stuff, and that can. I remember definitely back in the day feeling like, oh, this is awesome. You know, like you talk to somebody, like, oh, you want that item, you haggle with them, you add them to your friends list because something like, oh no, this is good, dude. Um, but as it has there's been 20 odd years, those attitudes have changed. The bots have kind of filled in. Other websites have made it easier to trade in a different manner. So yeah, maybe that community has faded, but then, I think it's a logical transition. Let's move into the first iteration of Diablo 3, right? First iteration, we had kind of like Diablo 2, where it was a little bit more open, but we had an auction house. We had something to actually navigate trade with. But you're right, it did have a faceless aspect of just like, hey, I want this. I'll purchase it with this gold, or for you softcore players, um, real money. I'll give you cash for this, which again, I'm still kicking myself because I didn't make any money out of it. Um, because I was playing hardcore, because I was stupid. I was stupid and I make poor decisions. But um, my life decisions aside, we had that option. So there's the real money aspect of it that we can talk about at some point, but the actual mechanism, trading done through the auction house, that you would be silly to actually trade with a real person unless they're your friend, right? Like, hey, I'm just going to give this to you. Diablo 3's trading system, where do you stand? Well, the initial system, I should say, the initial auction house system. Where do you guys stand? Was that what we want in Diablo 4? Well, granted, we're not going to get it, but would we like its return?
Are you talking about the pay model or just the auction house in general?
Let's do auction house in general because I think like the pay model is a complicated thing. Um, that's a different podcast itself, right? This we're just talking about a system of trade, a way to interact and trade with other players. Um, it will no cash involved this time. We'll get your cash some other way.
Yeah, I would like an auction house, especially for like mundane stuff. And from what we know is from reading some of the articles that you're able to like upgrade items. We don't know the extent of that, but if I'm looking for specific mods on an item, maybe that's the easiest way to find it. First, otherwise, what I see happening is if like those lower end items are able to be traded, I see something like Pure Diablo's website or D2JSP to where people are going to put those items on anyways, to where they have like those mods that, hey, this is an awesome item that you can upgrade. We don't know the extent of how that's going to work, so maybe I'm talking out my butt. So, but I'm hoping that like if it's kind of like how they've mentioned a couple times, like you upgrade certain things and you're pulling off the legendary fixes. I don't remember the one article like that I wrote about was you pulled a couple fixes off it and you placed it on an item. So I don't know how that all is going to work out, but if it's based around like having a base item that you can sell to other players, I think that could be really useful if you're looking for specific mods.
It definitely is incredibly convenient in terms of finding the items you want, and of course allowing others to find whatever you're trying to sell. But I think it is that to a detriment. I don't know if I want to. Well, I do have a monologue about that whole thing.
Please, you've got a monologue.
Okay.
You can't. So I mean, you can't tease us with something like that and then not deliver,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, fair enough. It's the thing Nineball usually does, where he then gets to throw it out because he mentioned it. Okay, so I've been looking just into general game design topics as a hobby for a while, and in game design there's this thing called a cursed problem, which is basically occurs when you have two design goals that are fundamentally incompatible, that you cannot make work together no matter how hard you try, no matter how you change the numbers around. It's just not possible. And one of the examples brought up, there's a great GDC talk on it. If you just look up on YouTube GDC curse problem, that'll come up. The main example the guy in the talk gives is, just to tell you what the hell I'm even talking about. You're trying to make a fighting game. You want it to be one free for all, so 1v1 v1 v1 whatever, and you also want it to be skill based to the point where the best player almost always wins. And these two goals alone just don't work together, right? You can't have an FFA game where players will team up against others and then expect the better player to win, because the weaker players will just team up against the better one every time, and there's nothing you can do about it as a game designer. And now going back to Diablo, actually, the auction house is another thing the guy brings up in that talk. And the two design goals there are an item-based progression system, which I think we can all agree a Diablo game should have, where finding items is exciting, and it's the thing that brings you forward. It's the main drive for most players, and a completely open and convenient trading system like the auction house. And the reason the guy argues they can't both exist together is that the moment you can easily turn every item you find into currency is the moment that every item to you becomes currency. Whenever an item drops, all you see is, okay, that is worth 250,000 gold. And at that point, it might as well just be gold that drops. And then you no longer have anything exciting happen in terms of item drops at all, because it's all just money. Of course, this is a bit of a simplification of how things go in reality, but if trading really is that easy, that convenient, then I don't really care about the items as such. I just care about what they're worth, is basically the core of the argument. And that's just nowhere near as exciting as actually caring about the items, of course. All right, that's it.
All right, I see it. I mean, I get it. Like I did play on the hardcore mode, so we only had a gold auction house. Um, I did like being able to purchase a few things here and there with gold and sell a few things as well. Um, Vang, I mean, I definitely enjoyed being able to kind of filter, like know exactly what it was I was looking for. I wanted, you know, this string of ears with whatever else other modifiers it happened to have on it at the time. Um, like being able to quickly find that was nice, but to your point, Hanks, um, it's not as fun as when it drops itself, right? To actually find that item. Um, but if I can't find that item, um, then uh, if you send it to Rush, he'll edit it in. Rush, you can edit this part out. Uh, but yeah, anything you want visually during the podcast, send it to Rush, and he'll be able to put everything in. Um,
Okay, because I found the image on the quarterly update that shows the rare amulet getting the essence.
oh, okay. Um,
Um, so that was already public knowledge on being released, and like they actually showed like I knew I read it somewhere. I didn't realize that I made the article on it. I mean, I know I did,
oh,
but I just couldn't remember where I was at.
it's easy to get confused these days. So we're gonna keep this all in, uh, because you know what, this is the real stuff here. Uh, but coming back to it, it is that strange dichotomy of whether you want the ease and the item, or you want the item, um, and I think maybe that's that logical transition into the new Diablo 3 system, right? As we have moved away from the auction house dissolves, right? Which was a weird thing. It was weird to start with this system, to know it, and then to see it go away. Um, but it does, and now we have this weird form of trade. In that trade exists in about a 1 hour window. Um, but all of your drops are catered towards your character. Um, you might find a couple of off-class items here and there, and you could trade with your party members who were in the instance that the item dropped for an hour. Thoughts on the Diablo 3 system as is? Vang?
Um, sorry, I was trying to thought I was going to comment on Ank's.
On his monologue? Well, if you got
Yes.
time, I will give you a monologue too. We can have dual monologues. It's a dual monologue
So I
session.
really like what you said at the end on how it all boils down to my playtime is now what is the value of my playtime. Unfortunately, even with an open, and that's one of the unfortunate things about open trade is everything ends up becoming that. Like even on the pure Diablos forum, everything's broken down to like what is its value. Like to me, a bloodletter is an amazing level 30 weapon, but it's worth like one perfect gem. If it's even worth that, maybe it's worth like half a gem.
Yeah.
These over time, lower level items don't get quality. And I guess that's one thing is, are we looking at Diablo 4? Is it going to be leveling kind of like Diablo 2 or more like Diablo 3 to where it's more about maxing your paragon, getting the cap, and like making this awesome character and moving, and then like and never moving on to where it's unlimited power. Versus Diablo 2 is more about, do I want more builds? I think that's the one biggest thing that I would take away from that, because I don't like it when my playtime is built around how much value do I get out of it. To me, that means I'm going to move on from the game really quickly. That's part of the reason why I didn't play Diablo 3 long at launch, is because it ended up being like, okay, I either have to buy things or find things. And if I'm not finding something, at what point is it more effective for me just to throw some cash at something? Because we all make X amount of money, at our day job. Maybe we have secondary jobs, and how much does that secondary job actually bring me? So that's a really good point. Is like, I don't want my playtime to be based on, look, I only found one perfect gem worth of items in this 3 hours. That was a waste of my time. I'm done playing this game. First, if it's a closed trading system to where like I don't have to worry about the value of them, I just have to worry about my own fun and finding my items. So there is a benefit to that by far, which is probably why I play single player, because then I don't have to worry about the value because I'm just doing my own stuff.
Well, I think so. There's a nice transition there. As a single player preferred person, there's a lot of alliteration there. I want to pause. Single player preferred person. Um, okay. Diablo 3 system. Were you the system as it stands? If it had been a little bit more robust itemization, is that a system that you're opposed to?
Um, no, if the itemization was there and like I actually felt like I was just throwing more than just different graphics around on a character, I think it would have been fine. Like I actually started writing like a whole thing on how to fix it, and I realized that the way it's set up, you can't fix Diablo 3. You just can't. You would have to literally wipe the whole game and start over. Any progress anybody's ever made would just have to be wiped, and you literally have to do like Diablo 3 2.0 or something. So I don't think it's ever going to happen, and especially with Diablo 4 around the corner, you just call it a day. But yeah, I think if there was more itemization, yeah. Um,
Yeah, and I think that's the other part. And so I'm interjecting. I know you want to talk. I think that's the other part of trade is itemization, and it is a weird conversation to have. Like we're focused here today on trade, but the other part is, well, I need good items to do that. Um, but we don't know really much about itemization, and we're not going to know until we get like an open beta to really chat about it. But for what we do know is there is a semblance of trade, so let's chat about that. Angst, Diablo 3's current trade system.
Actually, I'd argue it's not so much itemization; it's more drop rates in terms of how relevant trade might be. And in Reaper of Souls right now, the drop rates are just too high for trade to ever really matter, right? Like even if you could freely trade items, like the benefit you'd gain would be minimal. I mean, you'd eventually be able to maybe trade out your primals for primal ancient versions. Okay, well, great. That's a handful of stat points more. But you're never going to be at a point where you need to trade to find an item to make your build work. Right? In Diablo 3, that's just not going to happen, no matter how the trading system looks like at this point, because obviously we all know items just rain from the sky in all the iterations, and it's not hard to get the exact thing you're looking for. Um, so I think that is the main issue with Diablo 3 right now. Um, in terms of itemization, it's just you get what you want way too quickly. For there to be any I don't know, thought required into how you want to lay out your character, because you have that build ready and you know you can get there within a day to have all of the pieces you want, right? And there's no need for improvising things because you can't find that one piece of gear. There's just no need to really, well, use your own brain if you can just follow the build guide because you're guaranteed to get there.
Fair enough. I do like the counterpoint of the drop rates because you are right. There is no need because it does shower you in gold and green. So yeah, fair enough. So if we've been tiptoeing through all of the various trade systems. So what does what does Diablo 4 need? I mean, we can point out problems in all of them, right? What's your ideal Diablo 4 system? And then, we can put this to bed. We'll send the notes off to Blizzard. Um, and,
And they'll do exactly what we said.
right, and we'll get our beta invites and test it out for them, as I think is the job. Um, I haven't, got the actual letter from them about it, but I'm sure it'll come. So let's put this baby to bed. Vang, how do we do it? What's a good trade system?
I don't know. There's counterpoints to every trade system. I mean, I like the auction house, but at the end of the day, that also boils down to what is something valuable. Um, I think a mixture to where like certain things you can put in the auction house, whether just mundane items. Like we know there's going to be runes. I think maybe we can put those on or something. Things that are like kind of like not common, but common enough to where like you could get a defined value for easily. Versus the things that you can't get a defined value for. Maybe make those things the ones that you actually use outside resources to start trading. Finding people who have what you're looking for. Obviously not like eBay or D2JSP, but like there's tons of community forums. I mean, maybe they set up a website. Because did they do that with WoW? They had a trade website that they set up like an app or something. I thought they did something like that.
I think there might have been a trade app, but I love the eBay idea. I want nothing but Diablo for eBay. Um, and that's it. Like it just Diablo for eBay. Like there's a partnership, and that's how you get your stuff. It is an online auction house that we can recognize. Um, I think you have to at least submit some forms to sell stuff on there. I think we nailed it. Uh, Diablo for eBay. Done. Okay, sorry, I had to jump in on that one. So Vang, anyways, you were saying?
Um, I think selling things for real money, unless they cut off the trade, will always happen. It as far as I know, it happens in D3 too. People pay for power leveling, and they pay people to like just farm them through Red or Riffle 80, so they get the rain gold at the end. So I don't think you're ever going to stop that. The question is, where do you find the middle ground that keeps everybody happy? And I don't have the answer. I mean, I wish I did. I think an auction house for mundane stuff works, and then for like the no trade stuff that they said they're going to have. I mean, obviously can't do those, but maybe there's that middle ground with like those rares that hopefully Rush adds that nice cool image to it.
There it is, Rush. T-shirts, cool images. Thanks.
For Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree that you're never going to fully stop real money trading outside of the game, unless, of course, you stop trading entirely. But if the ideal trade system was no trading at all, then I guess we wouldn't be talking about it. There is another way. I mean, you mentioned, Vang, that we can just limit what kind of items can be traded. And if I recall correctly, the D4 devs said like years ago at this point that they wanted to limit it so that people can't trade legendary or unique or set items or whatever. Not exactly sure what the details were, and it may have changed anyway in the meantime. But what you could also do is just limit with whom you can trade, right? Like if I say, okay, there will be social features in Diablo 4, like no question. And if there's, I don't know, clan skills, what have you, if you can only trade within your clan, maybe that works because that limits any real money sellers quite drastically because it's only the 50 or whatever people you have in your clan that you can ever trade with. And anyone who would want to sell stuff for real money would need to be in a clan with people buying it. And that is then a very limited potential customer pool, so that it might not even be worth it, right? So maybe that's a way forward. Maybe you don't really limit what you can trade, but just with whom. I mean, Diablo 3, of course, has it that you can trade with your active party only.
Vang, you had a question.
Yeah. So with the clan thing, is there going to be like a they almost need like to have a cap, whether it's 50 people or so, kind of like whatever. Look at like a big guild and WoW to kind of get a good number. And then is there going to be like a waiting period? Because if there's not a waiting period, then that's kind of just a mute point because they'll just hey, join my guild today. and then you'll trade. So probably a 3 day waiting period is more than enough for most people to not want to trade with other people. And then maybe capping it like 25 to 50 people. I don't know what the dungeon cap is in Diablo 4 is going to be. Is it 4? Is it 8? Is it 6? I mean, I don't know the number that they have yet. I don't know if they've released that, and I don't remember reading about that part. So that would also like determine like how big a guild you're going to have. But I think that's not a bad way. Just unlimited between your guild. Or maybe
Yeah.
have it like a dual waiting period. Like, hey, when you join it, the first guild you join, it's a no. The second guild, it's a 1 day waiting period, and then it keeps going on. Like maybe it caps at 10 or something.
I think.
Yeah, I mean that's sorry.
Oh, I think.
Um,
Oh, yeah. Please, Ames.
I mean, as you said, initially, you can probably find holes in every system, right? In that way. I mean, another way you could try to prevent like clan hopping is to just say you can only trade stuff with the people who were in your clan when the item dropped. Full
Oh yeah,
stop.
yeah, that would work too.
It would then give more validity to being in a clan, right?
Exactly. It would foster that whole community aspect a bit more. Yeah.
And then, maybe that's how you also, in lieu of the old school, because the days of like creating free games are kind of done because we know Diablo 4 is going to be open world, right?
Yeah.
Unless I can make a game separately, which I don't think is possible. If it's all open world, then I can't make a game and give out gear to level ones or level, whatever it might be. But if I could fill the guild chest or something, if that like, hey, here's a tab in our guild stash for anybody whose hardcore character just died, Xanth. Feel free to take what you need again. Um, Maybe fill it up next time, bud. Stuff like that
I'll fill it
is
up for you.
all. I appreciate it. Um, like maybe that is a nice little system if we can't trade, but we can, um, you know, uh, drop a few things for guildmates or whatever it might be. I'm okay with that. But Diablo 4 eBay, uh, eBay,
There
eBay,
we go. Branding on point.
logo, eBay, um, t-shirts, eBay. That's it. That's what we need. I think we could do it. Um, any other thoughts on trade, guys? Any other lasting impressions when it comes to what Diablo 4's trading should be?
Let's have items we're trading. Like that would be nice. I mean,
Different conversation, man. That's itemization.
Yeah.
This is just can we take those items and or exchange them for goods, right? Um, Other people's goods. Items themselves, that is a complicated beast. Uh, I think I have talked about it many times. Think of the Diablo 3 podcast days of the many stabs they took at itemization. Um, we're gonna get there, and man, the podcast we are going to have when we find out about stuff. Um, but yeah, until we know, the last time I had heard about a Diablo item or Diablo 4 item was when they were talking about like the angelic and demonic things, which I haven't heard anything about since.
yeah, that
Um,
was December. That was the thing that I pulled up. Was
right.
the article I did in December.
Yeah.
So
So
almost a year away
yeah,
for
it's
any
been
real
a while.
itemization.
I
Um,
thought they'd actually already announced that they scrapped the demonic and angelic aspect
I
again.
think they did. They did announce that. I think it was June or July when they did something. It may have been one of their open talk ones, so where they changed it. I don't remember.
Yeah,
Maybe,
I think it wasn't like a huge "this is
yeah,
gone now" thing. It was hidden in something else. Yeah.
so we know it's changing.
Yeah.
Hence why we can't uh, obviously it's the podcast. We're going to talk about things that we have no power over. But um, until it's hard to form an opinion on something that I really know nothing about, right? And who knows what the actual itemization is. Um, until we do, it's hard to talk about it. But you are right. The items are going to play a big factor. Um,
I have another point slash open question.
all for
With
it.
with Diablo 3, there is a degree of customization to individual items, right? I can put my legendary gems in them that I have leveled myself, that are kind of mine in a way. I can use those to augment an item and put additional stats on them. I can have the enchantress reroll things, um, and at that point, I think trading becomes a much more interesting question, because imagine a Diablo 3 where trading is somehow worth it. Um, and now can you trade augmented items, for example? Would you be okay with that? Like if you customize the item in any way, if you put your own additional effort into the item, on top of whatever it took to actually get it in the first place, um, would that still be something you'd want to be able to trade, or is that something that then everybody would have to put in their own effort into the item to make it better, or customize it to their exact needs?
If I pointed that to where you take like the socket quest and how you find that nice blue
Mm,
item and you socket and it gets that two sockets that you really want, that's how I would look at that. Is like that one socket isn't worth anything, but that extra socket, that is where it's at.
mm,
For the customization, because like sometimes that extra socket is all you need on that one little nice
yeah.
circlet. Um, but I can see where like if you customize it at that point, you don't want it to be traded. Um, make it be like fodder for like crafting or whatever, however, maybe you
Mm.
just break it down at that point if you don't need it anymore. Um,
I
also,
I immediately thought of all the items in Diablo 2 that I had received or had created that got my character name imprinted on it.
yes, personalization.
Um, Absolutely stupid, but also very funny. Like you get it, and a month or so later, and you're just like, "Who is that guy?" Um, but like it was also unique to that character. It was their bone snap. It was their something else. So I'm all for it. If somebody put the time in to make like a really cool item, that also means that those were steps I didn't have to take, and that my character still has available to them to make their own version of it. And if I had to pay, X amount of more gold or ruins or something like that, but I got where I needed to be and I could use that enchantress, or I could use something else to make a good item. I think that's fine. I think that also adds like a niche specialty to some players who like to go and make items that are then valuable to other players, and like they can go and do that. Crafting in and of itself is a different conversation too, because like, if you have a good crafting system and you can make your own items, do you need to trade, or do they work hand in hand? Completely different conversation too, because again, we don't know much about crafting either, or what that actually entails. But trading
That
wise,
that
it
reminds me of Star Wars Galaxies, to where you had different. If any of you guys played that game, when you crafted things, players would bring you different items they had. Like if you're making a weapon, you'd have crate dragon items that would drop that had different modifiers on them, and they'd give you the best one they had, and you make a weapon out of it and be unique because it'd have like the best modifiers for them. And then another player would bring you something else that was totally different. Like I made a lot of armor, so like the stats like to equip it were lower, and like the endurance cost was lower. Just put in like mundane terms. So I could see to where if like they would introduce that in this game, to where you could almost have like a crafting subclass, that could be very interesting.
so let's wrap it up. Let's summarize here. Crafting, cool. Trading, we nailed. D-Bay, right? And once again, Rush, I'm asking for t-shirts. Diablo podcast, right? Just right here, right here. That's how we could get
Powered by
t
D-Bay.
right. Powered by.
We already have the sponsor for it.
Wow. Um, I just don't. I don't think it gets better. Um, I think the only thing that there is to do is moo at this point. Uh, so this has been the Diablo podcast. Moo.
Moo, 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 moo.
Moo, 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 moo.
See, and we'll end there.